Welcome everybody to our side event on the increased use of digital technologies on youth mental health issues. Mental health has been the hidden crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it unites us here together tonight. This side event is being organized by the United Nations Youth Delegates from Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Germany, Croatia, Switzerland, Sweden, Austria, Peru, and the USA. I am Manal Moussan and I'm the Dutch United Nations Youth Representative on Human Rights and Security, and I will be your co-host tonight. And I'm here with my colleague Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Manal. Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Jalul, and I am the Swedish Youth Representative to the United Nations, and I am delighted to welcome you all here today. We're honored to be joined by a fantastic panel tonight with speakers from all around the world and young activists. Tonight, they will share their experiences as well as their expertise on the topics of digitalization and mental health issues. So a warm welcome to you all.
And as the side event title already mentions, we're going to be speaking about digitalization and youth mental health issues. During the COVID-19 crisis, we observed a higher use of digital devices, starting from university and high school becoming online to meeting your friends during a FaceTime call instead of in real life. We even conducted a survey to highlight this increased use. And this was not without any consequences. The correlation between digital technologies and young people's mental health issues need to be highlighted. And specifically when we're talking about building back better. And that is exactly the topic that we want to discuss today.
Indeed. And we are absolutely thrilled to present to you today's program. First, His Excellence Gunther Sutter and Katie Ashton will officially open this side event. Then we will introduce our survey on mental health issues and the COVID-19 pandemic. After that, we will start our first panel discussion joined by 5 experts and also have some time for a Q&A. And last but not least, we will finish with our second panel with the young activists as well as students. And it will be followed by a Q&A and some closing remarks. But before we start, we have a message from some of the youth delegates live in the United Nations. Over to you, New York.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are delighted to welcome all of you to our youth-led side event on youth mental health and digital technologies that we co-organized with 10 different UN youth delegations.
First, we would like to thank our respective missions for co-sponsoring this event. Although we are pleased to have our mission's support, we still need more countries to recognize the problems of children and youth and address the interests of young people. As youth issues are widely overlooked, we are thankful to have this strong support and appreciate Germany's, Austria's, and Switzerland's effort for this crucial topic.
Without any further ado, we now would like to dive into today's side event and therefore welcome His Excellency, Ambassador Günther Sauter of the Federal Republic of Germany to the United Nations for his opening speech. Mr. Sauter, you have the floor.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Franka, Ruslan, Naji, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm excited to be here with all of you. This is a great opportunity to exchange with young people from different parts of the United Nations, from the European Union and far beyond. I think we have somebody here from Peru, from Switzerland, and from lots of other countries. I would like to briefly make 2 short points to get the discussion started. The first one is, I understand that you guys are discussing the issue of mental health during the COVID pandemic. This is something that has affected millions of young people all over the world who have experienced mental health problems in the wake of the COVID pandemic. In the lives that unfortunately many of us have been forced to lead, with lots of online meetings, with physical isolation, and with the effects that have been particularly hard and difficult for young people all over the world. It's a great thing that you guys and girls are discussing this, and it's very important that we here at the United Nations focus on this important issue because it affects millions of young people all over the world. There is a second issue that I wanted to briefly mention, and that's more fundamental. I don't know if you can see it. This is the UN Charter. And the preamble of the UN Charter says that one of the jobs of us as diplomats, as politicians working in the framework of the United Nations is to make sure that the world functions not only for our generation, but also for succeeding for future generations, i.e. for people like you here in this meeting. This is an obligation that we must live up to. It is therefore important that you, as young delegates here at the United Nations, give us the mandate to do us and also give us some pressure to do it because it's really in your interest. In very specific terms, this means that this year, during the General Assembly, we will work hard in order to make sure that 40 years after the first GA resolution on youth, which was passed in 1981, we make sure that we continue this discussion and that we will have a new resolution on this important topic. But this also has very practical ramifications. For example, I just heard that some of you have trouble getting into the UN building during these important days. And I just wanted to make it very clear to you that I myself and my team, we will work hard in order to make sure that the UN doors are open for you. So take my word on that. We will support you on this important issue. I wish all of you a great discussion here, and I am truly thankful that all of you are working hard inside the United Nations in order to make sure that they live up and that all of us live up to the mandate to make the world a little bit better, not just for the people who are here at the United Nations today, but also for the future generations that I was just referring to. Thank you so much, and let's have a great discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sauter, for this kind introduction and for pointing out the importance of youth participation. We now would like to invite our guest speaker for the opening speech for this side event. We welcome Ms. Katie Acheson, co-founder and youth development specialist, Numbers and People. She will tell us more about the World Youth Report. Please, Katie, if you're here, take the floor.
Thank you so much, New York. We've heard that Katie's no longer in the Zoom anymore, unfortunately, but we will continue our program. Thank you, New York.
We will go back to where we started. And for this side event, we even conducted a survey to get some data on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and mental health. And roughly 200 young people across the world shared their expertise with us. And in the first slide, you can see that 72.7% answered that their mental health has suffered due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the second diagram, you can see that 91.3% admitted that more digital devices, that they have been using more digital devices due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the last but not least diagram, you can see how young people would like to use their digital devices after the pandemic. And you can see that 75.5% admit that they want to continue and use their digital devices less than they did during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we believe that this is a great starting point for change.
Thank you so much for presenting that data, Manal. It will also be available after this panel to look at. But now it's time for us to have our first panel. We're happy to have a group of experts as well as people working within the area of digital technologies as well as mental health issues among young people. And we highly appreciate if you
I'm just going to, I'm going to interrupt you. I heard in my ear that Katie is back, so we would love to get back to New York and hear what our Katie is saying.
Katie, do we have you with us?
We're experiencing some technical issues, excuse us.
Katie's here. Katie, the floor is yours, please.
And if we hear it correctly, then Katie is not here anymore. So we will continue with our program. So the word is back to you. Katie is back with us.
Hello, can you hear me?
Let's try to get Katie to speak. Do you hear us,
Hi,
Katie?
everybody. I'm so sorry for that. You have
You
a
have
lot
a
of
lot of
technology.
technology,
And the problems that we can have when we're talking about digital technology. By the way, my name is Katie Aitchison. I am a co-founder of Numbers and People Synergy. I'm also a very fierce advocate for young people and have been working with young people for a very long time, since I was a young person myself. So I'm really pleased to be here today. I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on in Australia, the Kabi Kabi people, and acknowledge elders past, present, and future. I'm here today because I had the privilege of working with UNDESA and the Major Group for Children and Young People on a report called the World Youth Report 2022. It was a really exciting opportunity to speak to young people around the world and have their voices be front and center for the report. It was an incredible opportunity that happened at the beginning of this year. And that's only because UNDESA was really dedicated to making sure that young people's expertise and experience was front and center. It was actually the first time in the history of the report that young people and their experiences were given the same weight as academic input. So it's really exciting because it's a UN department that is showing that co-design and valuing young people's experience and advice was given the same attention, and the attention that really deserves as experts in a report such as this. Along with my incredible statistician, guru, and co-founder, Gemma Wood, we were able to talk at the beginning of the year to 2,949 young people through a perception survey. I also spoke with 148 young people in focus groups across the world. And something that's really special and unique to me is I was able to conduct in-depth interviews with 9 young people, and their stories will be included in the report. This kind of shows the intense interest of young people in the issue of mental health and well-being, and it also shows that the UN is taking it very seriously. The young people's mental health is being impacted, that it's a serious issue for young people, but also there are many things that impact on it, and we want to understand more. So I thought I'd bring you a couple, or maybe 4 points from what the young people said to me during the consultations. And I want to make sure that I read out some of their comments so that you can hear it from themselves. I wish they could be here with me, but can't really collect the whole world just for one meeting. But thankfully the report will come out and you'll be able to read it all for yourselves. So the first thing I want you to consider is something one young person said. He said, I think it's really misleading for us to treat the digital world and the real world as if they're discrete, separate things. For young people, they're one and the same. The first thing to consider is this delineation between the online environment or the online world and the real world. It's really problematic. Young people said that social interactions, education, employment, mental health supports, and engagement with society all happens online in tandem with their local context. And participants stated that their real world, or the online environment and the physical environment, is their real world. I think it's fascinating that sometimes as adults we separate them, but young people said that those two things work in tandem. Another young person said, online is where we socialize, access information and services, not just with respect to mental health, but the education, news, media, legal affairs, accommodation, and more. So the second thing to consider is that young people said, talking to friends, whether online or in person, is core for their improving their mental health. But importantly, their social interactions, whether with local friends or online friends, take place on social media platforms and through the internet. The young people reported learning skills of communication, emerging technologies, hobbies, and advocacy and self-care, and that these were all really valued for their future employment. So it's really important to think about the fact of how do we connect young people to each other, and often that involves online. Another young person said, during the pandemic, I started to work more on myself, working on my headspace, being mindful and aware of how I was feeling and how I managed my reactions, my behavior. And also I saw a social media account where people said, it's okay not to be okay. I think young people, an important point that young people said is that the online environment is viewed as the easiest access point for accessing mental health supports. As you think about it, there's unlimited access to information about mental health and technology that helps them find like-minded people and communities with similar experiences. And this had a significant impact on young people's mental health. They're able to access services online that they just weren't available in their local context. And anonymity was really key factor for many participants seeking information and support about mental health. Also, young people reported that the options for availability for interaction, like text, emails, chats, forums, and posting platforms, also enabled them to get the supports that they needed, and they were really inclusive. I think COVID's definitely shown that services and governments can really adapt to make things more accessible, and it's been a really positive thing. However, young people also mentioned that they're concerned that there's a growing self-diagnosis without mental health professionals being involved. Participants explained that they were concerned that young people were turning to each other for support, which is great, but they also didn't engage professionals to help and support sometimes when they needed it. So something to consider. And the last point is that young people were concerned about the negative impacts of online environment on their mental health. One young person said, it does impact a person's mental health and well-being when it's heavily used without consciously noticing its impact. We rely on social media to define how our life should look, which leads us to imposter syndrome and comparison amongst others. Long periods of in front of screens leading to sedentary lifestyle, hyper-comparison, and social competition were the largest concerns for young people. Social media was acting as an echo chamber where users had access to only one side of the argument, but many young participants said that they were seeking out other platforms to hear diverse opinions. So from all of this information, what can you do? Well, one of my favorite quotes from a young person is, they said, one of the positive things my family did for my mental health was allowing me to have an opinion and to ask questions. So firstly, I'd say it's really important to listen to a diverse group of young people. UNDES has shown us that it's possible in the UN context and with such a large report and project to really seek out the advice and expertise of young people from diverse backgrounds across the world, and I think it should be continued. A couple of practical things that young people said is that it's possible to train young people to manage the risks of online environment. Many adults think that they're so concerned about the risk that they don't think that young people can manage it. So young people suggested, why don't you just help us manage it? Teach us the skills so that we can do it for ourselves. Also think about the local context. Poverty and deprivation is significantly connected to mental health and access to services. And it's really important that any policies that implement mental health supports really take into consideration access, and also encourage mental health responses to involve both online and offline worlds. These recommendations and many more will be in the UNDESA report, World Youth Report, released early next year. I really commend UNDESA and the Major Group for Children and Youth in taking the opportunity to talk to young people and making sure that they're front and center. It's been my privilege to be part of this, and I hope that you all have a great.
Thank you very much, Katie, and I'm looking forward to read the report. I really like the part when you mentioned one of them saying that we usually look at the digital world as one and the real world as the other, but we need to start looking at them as one. I will definitely think about that more. And I want to thank all of the UN delegates, Ruslan,
Naji and Franca,
Franca.
thank you so much for sharing with us what's going on in New York as well. And also Gunther, I will definitely make you hold that quote about having us in New York hopefully next year. We're here in Brussels right now, but we hope to be with you in New York next year. And we also apologize for the technical difficulties. We are hoping that it will go a little bit smoother now. It has been 1.5 years with this digital technologies, but we're still not 100% sharp, so we're hoping for the best now. We will now go on and continue our program. So we will now have our first panel, and here we are delighted to present to you a group of experts and people working within the field of digital technologies as well as mental health issues among young people. And we highly recommend you, our audience, to submit your questions to the panelists. We will make sure that all of your questions will be answered. First, we would like to give the floor to Madam Caroline Wimas. She's the Deputy Coordinator of the Mental Health Reform here in Belgium, and her work is also focused on the target group of young children and youngsters. So please, Caroline, if you're here with us right now, the floor will be yours soon.
Yeah, and after we have spoken to Caroline, we will continue with the other 4 speakers who are part of our panel. So while we're still waiting for Caroline to hop in, we're just going to ask all of you again to submit your questions via the chat box on YouTube. We really hope that this is an opportunity for you to ask all your questions to the panelists. We cannot promise that we will answer each one of them, but we can promise that we will try to do as much of them. And the ones we don't get to answer during this session, we will email you back with an answer.
So all of you will have an answer to your questions. So please submit them right away, and we will try to give them to our panelists. And we will have 2 different panels. So we will start off our first panel in a moment.
You can continue to submit your questions whenever you like. And I think it's time to move back to Caroline.
Do we have the Deputy Coordinator, Caroline?
I think excuse me, I think we're having a technical problem. Just give us a few seconds because we couldn't hear you, miss. We're gonna try again. So, back to you, Caroline.
And we apologize for that.
There's a technical problem, but we can actually hear her. Do you? No, they can't. Excuse me, miss, we're going to have to interrupt you. We don't hear you. We're going to take a 5-minute break due to the technical issues.
Madame Caroline, we
you, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Oké, goed. Even wachten, we gaan terug een nieuw open doen. Goed. Dus eindwoord.
We're hoping that we're back right now. We're testing it again. We truly apologize for the technical difficulties, and we're hoping that we can have a better flow during the rest of the event today. We are going to soon give the word back to Madam Caroline, if she's with us right now. Can you hear us, Madam?
I can hear you, yes, clearly.
Perfect. The floor is yours. Go ahead, and we apologize once again.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me, and sorry for the inconvenience. I will start all over. So, not only did COVID put enormous pressure on our healthcare system, literally to save lives, but it also meant mental pressure and also mental suffering for many people. Denying a society freedom to save lives is therefore very drastic. Mental suffering for children and young people can have short and long-term consequences in several areas. For example, negative impact on learning progress and future opportunities on the labor market, on functioning within relationships, and on health itself, of course. The COVID-19 pandemic and the health measures that have been imposed, such as the obligation to take courses online, which, as already mentioned, has a direct link with the topic of today, limiting social contacts, the loss of certain additional income, for example, student jobs, the feeling of loneliness and even the feeling of exclusion have aggravated these psychological complaints. But actually, we didn't need COVID to see that we had an increasing problem with our mental well-being for some time here in Belgium, not least among young people. Unfortunately, still too often with fatal consequences. For example, the suicide ratings among young people between the ages of 18 and 25 are systematically higher in our country than in neighboring countries. I find that dramatic and unacceptable. I have long been convinced that we had to approach this much more thoroughly, but above all, much better and therefore differently. And that vision is not just one of much needed investments in mental health, of making it more accessible and more affordable. No, that vision, and therefore the reform that we are implementing in Belgium since 2010, must also mean a cultural shift, a mindset change in how we deal with mental health care. And that brings me to question, what is that vision of the Belgian mental health care reform? Well, actually, it is very simple. In our approach of reforming mental health care, we need to push boundaries, break down walls, and most importantly, work together. Care and solidarity are best decided bottom up instead of from a government office in Brussels. And that is exactly the reason why, even though I am not an expert myself with regard to the impact of increased use of digital technologies on young people's mental health, I still find it extremely important and a great honor to be able to sit here today in the panel, surrounded by other like-minded policymakers, but above all, surrounded by young people, committed and motivated representatives of children and young people who have enormous wisdom about how we can organize our mental health care more accessible, more qualitative, and more effective. The reform we are currently implementing in our mental health care system in Belgium is based on that vision, an approach where collaboration is key. This is extremely ambitious, precisely because we are aiming for a culture shift and a mindset change. Pushing those boundaries, breaking down walls, working together, that interferes with how we traditionally think about healthcare, and therefore also about mental health care, which is, you don't feel well, here's a number from a doctor or a psychologist, and he or she will solve it. Or you keep walking around with it, and then you have to solve it yourself. Social well-being, mental health, and physical health go hand in hand. Problems in one of these dimensions move quickly in the other way as well. Therefore, general practitioners, psychologists, nurses, youth workers must be able to tackle the problems of their clients across the boundaries of their own disciplines and knowledge. Children, young people, and their supportive context need to become active participants in organizing mental health care on all policy levels. And by giving them more to say, one can formulate better, more adapted answers to care-related questions, such as the opportunities, but also the pitfalls of an increased use of digital technologies on their mental health. I thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Caroline. We're honored to have you here with us today, and thank you very much for sharing with us what's going on in the Belgian mental health system. This is definitely something that we will think about and perhaps even have us with us when we give input on a youth resolution. It was also very interesting to hear about that we need to have a change of mind and a change of culture as well. It's a mindset that we need to change. So thank you very much.
And now we'll continue to give the floor to Manon Deshays. Excuse me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. And she is our policy officer of the European Youth Forum, and she is leading the work on COVID-19 and youth. And we are so happy to have you here with us. And we would love to hear more about your experiences. So please, Manon, if you're here, take the floor.
Yes. I'm here. I hope you can hear me well. And thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to talk about this very important topic with all of you. And thank you, Caroline, already for introducing the discussion. So yeah, I mean, I'm from the European Youth Forum. And so in case you don't know it, but we're a platform of youth organization in Europe. And so we work in Europe, even beyond the European Union, and to really try and empower young people to participate in public life, to improve their own rights. And we actually recently released a report called Beyond Lockdown, the Pandemic Scar on Young People, really trying to analyze the impact of the pandemic on young people's rights and lives. As we could see, of course, that it had a very particular important impact on their lives, on our lives even. And I think two of the main findings that were really, really important for us, without going into too much detail on this, but it was that first, there is a very strong and important interconnection between both socioeconomic conditions of young people and their mental health. And this is really important, and we need to take that into account when we think of solutions. The other important data there was that nearly 2/3 of young people may be affected by mental health issues due to the pandemic. And this was very, very worrying for us, because as we were saying beforehand, of course, mental health has been an issue for decades and decades, but we've seen that the pandemic has made it even stronger, even more urgent for us to take really a strong look at that and try to come up with solutions all together. And I think what we saw was that there was a particular impact and link with education and the need to go digital because of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, schools had to close down, and so all the education had to go and be remote. And that was a very difficult situation actually for young people and young students, because it meant that not everyone had equal access to the digital tools, and that there was oftentimes, even many times, a loss of quality and even a loss of learning in general for young people. And we saw that in the report already. We had some data there where nearly 1 in 10 students were not getting any courses, teaching or testing, and around 2/3 of the students believed that they were learning slightly less or even significantly, sorry, this is a hard word to say, less than they usually would in a normal situation, if we can say. So that was really a strong signal that something wasn't right, that the transition to the digital world and tools was not actually that easy and that well done. And we actually saw that that had even more of an impact on marginalized young people, because from, again, the survey that we had, we saw that around 3/4 of students that were in marginalized situations believe that they were learning significantly less than they usually would. So, I think here we can really see why the increased use of digital tools would have an impact on education, on mental health, with this link with education, because it means that there was a lot of educational uncertainty because of the lack of access, the lack of quality, but also just the fact that you don't know if tomorrow you're going to be able to follow a class. You don't know if next year you're going to be able to pass your exams because of the situation. And so this uncertainty and just the challenges of the daily life of online learning were a very strong source of stress and well-being issues for young people. And there's also this fact that the impact for now, it's a bit difficult to exactly see how much impact it will have on us in the long term, but we know it will have a negative impact on the employment, on the educational outcomes, and therefore on their health and well-being. And unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of answers from policymakers to kind of remedy the situation. So what we've been calling for is, first, of course, comprehensive solutions in general that really take into account that interconnection that I was talking about earlier. But when we look specifically even at education in general, some of the solutions we can think about, and we can maybe come back to that also during the Q&A, but would be funding to guarantee that there is equal access to digital tools, that there is digital literacy, which is another issue. This is not because we are young that we're all super literate in digital tools in general. This is kind of a cliche, and we need to really work on this. There are actions that can be taken, of course, at the European level and maybe translated in the worldwide level, because I know we're talking here with a worldwide really view. It can be about really ensuring that this accessibility of widespread online learning for young people, trying to take the lessons from what happened and really build back better, as we were saying. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to discuss that with you also later on, and I'm trying to stick to the 5 minutes. I really agree also with what Caroline was saying about the need for young people to actively participate and be included in making those policies happen, in designing those policies, and this is something we really advocate for and will continue to advocate for.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manon, for providing us with so many beautiful insights. We're so happy to hear that you're fighting for youth participation on a European level. And at the same time, it feels like the conclusions we found with our small survey kind of seem the same, like the one you conducted on a bigger scale. We're very happy to have you here. Thank you.
And we're finally seeming to have a little bit easier with the technology here, so we're going to present our next speaker, Shunta Takino, and he is a junior policy analyst at the OECD, and he's also a specialist in mental health issues and youth policy. So Shunta, if you're here, the floor is yours. Shunta, are you here with us, or did I just jinx everything? It seems like I did. I should have just stayed cool for the rest of the panel. But we're hoping that you will soon be with us here.
If you can hear us, please interrupt us. And in the meantime, we want to remind everyone who's listening to our live stream on Facebook to remind you that you can submit your questions and that we will come back to them later on.
As well as on YouTube. So Shunta, the floor is yours. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me too. So thank you. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. And I just want to begin by echoing the points made by Manon, Caroline, and others, that it's really important that when we talk about young people's mental health, that we involve young people themselves. So today I've been given this very specific brief to actually talk about the impact of digital transformation on young people's mental health, but with a focus particularly on employment and jobs. But to do that, I think I need to first set the ground by providing a broader overview of why work matters for the mental health of young people. The relationship between mental health and work is bidirectional. Good quality work matters to the mental health of young people because it provides them with income, independence, connections, and a sense of belonging and self-worth, just some of the factors that contribute to good mental health. But poor mental health and lack of access to timely treatment can also hinder participation at work and cause difficulties for young people to find jobs. So it's not surprising that unemployment is associated with poor mental health. For example, working age individuals with mental health conditions are about 20% less likely to be employed in European OECD countries and are paid on average about 20% less, even if they are in work. So strengthening the labour market outcomes of young people is particularly important because prolonged unemployment at a young age can have long-term consequences for labour market and mental health outcomes further down the line. So this is really the context in which the COVID-19 pandemic struck. And the disproportionately high levels of mental distress that we see amongst young people today is definitely in part due to a weak labour market resulting from the crisis. Young people in work have often been the first to be dismissed during the crisis. Young people looking for work for the first time are doing so at a time of limited vacancies. And by the end of 2020, around 12% of 15 to 29-year-olds in the OECD were not in employment, education, or training, or 2.9 million more young people than 1 year before. So when we think about how to address the youth mental health crisis, in which young people are reporting high levels of mental distress, a key question is, how do we ensure that young people are supported into high quality jobs? Now that I've set out this big picture, I'd like to focus a little bit more on three specific considerations of the impact of the digital transformation on employment and mental health for young people. So the first is about young people not in work, and the increased importance for employment services in the current environment to equip young job seekers with digital skills. Basic digital skills are necessary to access the opportunities offered by online training, learning and support. And employment services also need to equip young people with the digital skills that are being increasingly demanded in the world of work, because that's really key to increase the employability of young job seekers. So that's why governments across the world are putting into place digital training for young people in employment services in countries ranging from Korea to Portugal and beyond. So in both Korea and Portugal, for example, training in digital skills is being prioritized by employment services for young people during the COVID-19 crisis. Now, second is about the mental health of young people in work, and specifically the implications of telework on mental health. As you might expect, many, if not most, young teleworkers had never actually teleworked prior to the crisis. And in fact, half of young workers in EU countries have teleworked for the first time during the pandemic. There is too little evidence so far to draw firm conclusions on whether working from home and telework has a net negative impact on mental health, but it is resulting in major changes in how work is organized, which has significant implications for mental health. Teleworking can blur boundaries between work and home, can result in working longer and more unconventional hours. And for young people who are more likely to be newly employed, telework can mean a loss of opportunities to develop social connections and relationships with colleagues that are vital when first starting out work. And I think this point really echoes the point that Katie made at the beginning of this session. As telework looks set to stay beyond the pandemic, while keeping in mind that many jobs cannot be done remotely, countries do need to build on the foundations set during the pandemic. That means policies like the right to disconnect policy framework, which aims to ensure all workers have the right to switch off outside of official working hours in an increasingly digital world where the difference between on and off time is becoming increasingly blurred. And lastly, I just want to say that the digital transformation also presents an opportunity to expand the mental availability of mental health support, and specifically in workplaces and employment services too. For example, One area where employment services could take significant measures is by scaling up integrated mental health and employment services for young job seekers. This can be less costly and easier to scale up than face-to-face treatments and can bring the dual benefit of addressing mental health issues while also improving employment prospects. So with that, I'll hand back over to the youth delegates, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very, very much, Shunta. It was very nice to hear different aspects. Usually when we hear about the youth, we look at them as students, but it was also interesting seeing it from a labor market perspective. And if I heard you correctly, 2.9 million, that's a huge increase. So thank you very much for sharing your data, and thank you very much for also sharing key suggestions to solutions. Thank you.
And now we will continue to give the floor to the last two speakers that we have for this panel. And first we'll give the floor to Mr. Osama Manzar, and he is the founder of the Digital Empowerment Foundation. We're so happy to have you here. Please, Osama, take the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here at the middle of the night. I'm speaking from India, actually in a southern corner of the country called Pondicherry. It's very interesting that we are discussing about mental health, digital divide, post-pandemic, more from the perspective of the people who are connected and hyper-connected and so on and so forth. But I am also talking from a country, India, which has got world's one of the largest unconnected people. And you'll be surprised to know that the unconnected population here is not only those who are aged, but also those who are underage and young and youth and all that. To give you a in fact, before talking to you, I was just scrolling a search engine. I typed mental health, digital divide, and pandemic. And then hundreds of headlines came saying that this girl committed in Kerala, this girl committed somewhere else, somebody committed suicide because mobile was not available to her. Then somebody, committed suicide because she couldn't do online classes and so on and so forth. And there are many, many analysis that was available. So, it's very interesting that when we talk about youth and when we talk about digital and when we talk about mental health, there are three things that I want to highlight. Number one, how much of our dependency of our youth has suddenly become very high on digital, so much that the people are feeling excluded. So it is no more a privilege, but it's a necessity, number one. Number two, the knowledge of mental health itself. In a country like India, mental health is not even understood as a mental health. Any of those problems where you have a psychological problem or a mental health problem is not even considered. It's a stigma. So how much knowledge and awareness is being created among our youth that we should recognize this as a normal health problem and address it. And the third is, how do we create policies to make our young population connected equitably? Our youth should be connected equitably, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, age, and so on and so forth. To give you an idea, India has got 280 million students, 280 million. This is larger than many, many countries in the world. They suddenly got disconnected as soon as the schools were closed and the education institutions were closed. It also has got 8.5 million teachers. So it's not only that the students need to be or the youth need to be online, but the teacher also need to be online if you are not attending a class in physical mode, but in a virtual mode. So how much of digital infrastructure that we have not invested before the COVID is required to be invested in such a way that it becomes part and parcel of our life? And the last thing is that even if you make digital available, even if you make infrastructure available, even if you make all awareness, are you really making digital literacy and digital skilling as part of the daily life? Is it part of our culture? Is it part of our behavior? That is another issue. because most of these suicides and most of these mental health problem is not only because of the non-availability of digital devices, but also because of the inability to handle digital devices. So the whole etiquette, or what you call as netiquette, or the mobile etiquette, or the online etiquette, is a serious issue. Look at this conference itself. How many times we got worked up because our of coordination from Zoom to YouTube and the broadcast, and who is synchronized with online or not. So these are very, very important things. And I would like to mention that while post-pandemic has made digital mandatory, we should not forget the fact that half the world is still unconnected, and those who are connected are not meaningfully connected. That means they are connected either on 2G or 3G, or less, which is not equipped to do online classes or online education or online transaction or online commerce or online video, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that the world gears up to create digital infrastructure as a fundamental right. We are talking on UN platform. UN makes it possible for all the world to realize that it's a fundamental right. It's a right for every human being to be online and meaningfully online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Osama. We are so happy that you're here, and this was exactly the reason why we asked you to be one of our speakers. You really took us back to the straight facts. Half of our whole world doesn't even have access to digital technology. When you said 219 million, I could only think about, if I multiply the whole Netherlands 10 times, we won't even get close to that amount. So it's so important for us to not only focus on the part of the world that does have access to digital devices, but also to focus on the part that doesn't. So thank you so much for your inspiring words.
Thank you. And now we will actually go to our last panelist for the first panel. Our speaker is Erik Ullnes. He is a policy advisor for child safety and protection at Save the Children in Sweden. He has also previously conducted a study to monitor the consequences for Save the Children's target groups linked to the pandemic. So Erik, if you can hear us, the floor is yours, please.
Hi everyone. And I also have to say I'm very honored to be here talking to all of you. And I would like to start with that, to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, because in the Save the Children Sweden, we closely monitored the risks and consequences for children and youth regarding the pandemic. And as some of you may know, Sweden didn't have any major lockdowns, but still, of course, the pandemic had major impact all over the society. And many, many things have been said about the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and most aspects have been discussed over and over again for the last 1.5 years. And one thing that I often heard in the public debate, especially in the start of the pandemic, is that it was described as kind of a fair crisis, the pandemic. You could hear a reasoning like COVID is affecting everyone equally. Everyone could get affected, regardless of poverty, social class, or other similar aspects. Even presidents and prime minister could be affected. And when we and many others studied the effects, and especially the effects on society of the COVID-19 pandemic, we now know that this crisis wasn't fair at all. Nothing can be more wrong. Because we now know that people, and especially children and youth, who were already experiencing adversity, were a lot more vulnerable to the effects of the pandemic. And we focused on children and youth in socioeconomic vulnerability, children and families in migration in Sweden, and children and youth experiencing violence and neglect. And these children, youth, and family were hit the hardest with the consequences the COVID-19 pandemic had on the society. Children who couldn't get homeschooled because they shared a one-bedroom apartment with their 4 or 5 siblings. Unaccompanied minors who had to get their school exams to get a permanent resident. Children and youth who live in constant fear of their parents losing their job, and also losing their home due to the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We can also see that children and youth experiencing domestic violence and honor-related violence were particularly affected. due to isolation at home and not being able to go to school made them extra vulnerable. And as we know, domestic violence and other kinds of violence tends to increase in these kinds of crises, like the COVID-19 pandemic. As an example, our online chat for youth who experienced honor-related violence and control had around 5 or 6 times more calls and chats during the beginning of the pandemic compared to the whole last year before. So one thing we know is that children and youth in adverse situations are a lot more vulnerable to these kinds of crises. One big effect of the COVID-19 pandemic is the increased use of digital technologies. And many of these consequences I talked about is connected to this. And the major use of digital technologies is nothing new for most children and youth, at least not in Sweden. Video games, social media, and other platforms are already as a natural arena for meetings as to meet someone in real life for most youth and children. But when it comes to children and youth in adverse life situations, for the most vulnerable, they need the presence of safe adults. And here we adults have fallen behind. We adults must be as present in the digital world as in the real world. And that's a big learning from the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, while homeschool teachers, counselors, and others didn't have the time to or possibility to ask that, extra questions. How are you? How are things at home? And this was a big obstacle to prevent and detect mental illness, but also neglect and domestic violence. For most children and youth, your home, your parents or guardians, that's the safest thing you got. You got safe adults who care for you, who can guide you through life. But when you lack that, other adults become extremely important. Adults like teachers or football coaches, neighbors, and others. I think one of the most important aspects are to get more safe adults present in the digital world, to all of the arenas where children and youth live their lives and interact to not just each other, but also to other adults. We need to guide and help children and youth in digital arenas, especially the ones that can be riskful. And we also need to be present and to be able to detect and prevent riskful things to happen, but also to be of support when things do happen. The risks and the
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm sorry that I perhaps interrupted your last sentence there, but I think you summed up a lot of what was said in this discussion, that what we see, that it's pretty clearly that different groups are affected differently by the pandemic, and we see that marginalized groups such as youth unfortunately are one of the groups that are extra vulnerable. So thank you so much for sharing this data, and thank you so much for also telling us about the different groups, such as the groups that are victims of honor-related crimes as well. Thank you.
And I think that sums up that we have spoken to all our panelists in the first panel, and we would love to provide our audience who is listening or tuning live to ask their questions for us. So I'm going to look at my colleague and see whether there's a question that we want to address to some of the panelists.
Yes, we have actually gotten in a couple of questions, and the first question is going to be to Manun. According to you, what is the future of digital education, and how can youth benefit from it? Manun?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I think this is a big question first. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Great. I think this is a really, really important question, and one that actually we need to build together. We're trying, of course, to bring the voice of young people there, but I think this is something that will take some time to define and to design all together. And so, I can't give an answer like this, but the way I see it would be an online education that is accessible for all. What I was saying about digital literacy, I think, is a main point there. We cannot assume that all young people are completely literate regarding digital tools. That's something that needs to be achieved. We need an education that is so accessible in that sense of literacy, but also in the very technical sense, with just having the tools, having a computer, having a connection, having a space where you can actually learn and study, in the peace and quiet, and have that concrete space where it's possible. And it's an education that is inclusive of all, whether it be online or in the real world, even though I agree with what you said from one of the previous surveys about making sure that this distinction is actually not that relevant, and we need to question it, and we need to make sure that at the end of the day, online education or physical education is of the same quality and as inclusive in both sides, if I can say.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful. Thank you.
And our audience is very active, so we have another question coming in. And this one is for Caroline Wemas. I'm going to read the question out loud. I hope you can hear me. So the question is, in the Belgian reforms, do you foresee a significant increase of digital mental health services? And if yes, how do you intend to target children and young people specifically? So that was a question for Caroline.
Yes. Yes, we foresee an increase of different modalities in mental health care services. I think this is a very important objective in the Belgian healthcare reform to implement other forms than just the face-to-face consultations that are common in our mental health care services. So we have some projects now that are, for example, drug use or alcohol abuse. But we have now a new convention since the beginning of this year. And in this convention, it is really a big challenge to look into how we can really integrate blended care in our mental health care systems, because I think a lot of mental health care workers are a bit reluctant to do this kind of blended care. So we are really at the beginning of this this new big step that we have to make. So
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Caroline, for your answer. I hope that answers the question from the person of the audience.
We are actually having time for one more question, and it's a very, very specific question, actually. It's for Shunta. Do you think that increased digital connection is an opportunity for young people, not in education, training, or employment, also called NEETs? If yes, in which way?
I think absolutely. It's really a matter of, it's a bit cliche, but what the outcome that the digital transformation has depends on how policymakers shape that, and as well as how the people themselves use digital tools. And I think, as I stressed in my remarks, I think one of the keys when it comes to young people not in education, employment, and training is to think about how digital tools can be used to increase access and availability of support, as well as outreach. So how, for example, can we use the digital environment to make sure we reach out to young people who are potentially in vulnerable circumstances, or young people who are not in employment? How can we maybe connect to their digital world, get in touch with them, and provide them with the services that policymakers can provide, whether that be mental health services, whether that be employment services, whether that be training? So I think that there are many opportunities that are there from the digital transformation. So it increases, we have greater potential for both outreach and provision of services. I think that's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Shunta. And I also want to thank the entire panel. You have been so giving by sharing your experiences and also sharing your answers to these kind of difficult questions, to be honest. But now we unfortunately have to move on in our program, but we highly recommend our audience to be prepared for our second panel, because there will be a Q&A there as well. So thank you to our first panel, truly.
And thank you again to our audience who is asking these critical questions. We love to have you here with us too. So we're very excited to start with the second panel. And for this panel, we invited 5 young experts who will share their story about mental health issues and digitalization. And we would like to start by briefly introducing each one of the speakers. And we want to do that in the following order. Maybe it would be good if Victor, Hugo, you could start first. And when you're done with briefly introducing yourself, you could pass on the word to someone else. So that would mean that we would start with Victor. Hugo first.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. My name is Victor Hugo, and I am the founder of Mentally Aware Nigeria Initiative. which is a youth-led.
Victor, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
hear you.
Yes.
Great. Right. So I'm Victor, and I'm the founder of Mentally Aware Nigeria Initiative, which is a youth-led nonprofit in Nigeria focused on building a community of young persons interested in having conversations about mental health. Right now, I'm in Copenhagen, and I'm the MHPSS and Youth Engagement Advisor for the MHPSS Collaborative, which is hosted by Save the Children in Denmark. Thanks for having me. I will hand over to Leslie.
Hi, hello, my name is Leslie Gonzalez. I'm a 7-year medical student and I am doing a medical internship. Last year, I assumed the role of National Officer on Human Rights and Peace of IFMC Peru. And I also a human rights trainer of IFMC trainer in Colombia. In action, I experience in human rights issues with particular focus on women's rights, mental health, issues, and I organize campaigns, workshops, and various activities at the local and national level at the same to positive impact to vulnerable populations. I also play the political role in March pronouncements for the rights of women and vulnerable groups. Laura.
Hello, my name is Laura Pereira. I'm 20 years old and I'm a Luxembourgish activist. I mostly draw attention to sensitive topics on my social media by either posting stories or going live and have an open conversation. I was also invested in the making of an event with the national youth organization that's called Jugendinfo that raised awareness on the topic of mental health and its consequences of it still being silenced. And I'm currently also working on a project about mental health with UNICEF Luxembourg. And well, I'm honored to participate in this event because it's something that affects the majority of people and we don't talk about our mental health enough. And so, yes, I'm glad to be here. I'll pass to Fatima.
Thank you so much, Laura, for giving me the floor. Hello, everyone. My name is Fatima. I'm a fourth-year medical student and I come from Sudan. I'm a global health advocate and I coordinated multiple activities about mental health impact on medical students during COVID-19 pandemic and among vulnerable groups, including diabetic children in my country. I also was part of the IFMSA delegation and represented 1.3 million medical students in external meetings like the United Nations High-Level Political Forum and the World Health Assembly. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak, and I will give the floor to Anna.
Thank you so much, Fatima. So it's really nice to meet every single one of you. I'm Anna. I'm also 20 years old, and I co-lead on the Under 18 COVID Community Champions Program. In partnership with the Merton Public Health and NHS South West London Clinical Commissioning Group. So the overall aim of this program is to establish a forum for young people aged 11 to 17 where school-based COVID-19 champions can come together online to discuss COVID in Merton and get latest information, discuss how the pandemic has affected them and their families and communities. This is where the most important aspect comes of mental health. We have sessions with young people where, we discuss really heavy topics for them and we provide a really safe space for them, as well as how they can, as local champions, support and influence the COVID response in Merton, not only in a local level, but we also want to expand it nationally. We want to involve as many young people as we can in the UK. So yeah, we do also a lot of videos that engage a lot of young people to do with mental health and to do with COVID as well. So yeah, that's an introduction of me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you everyone for that great introduction. I am so happy to have such a diverse panel. We have people from Peru, Sudan, Copenhagen, a very diverse panel. The idea of this panel is not to give the word to someone specific. We want this to be an open dialogue where you can share your stories and your experiences, but also react to others if you have had a similar one. So if anyone dares to have the first word, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Okay, I just go for it. Right, so I'll probably start with introducing my organization and the kind of work that we do. So Mentally Aware Nigeria Initiative, which is MANI for short, has been existing in Nigeria since 2016. And one of the reasons why we came up was because we saw a huge gap in mental health care and services for young people. Just to give a background, Nigeria is a country of about 200 million people, and we have less than 200 psychiatrists, which is almost one psychiatrist to 1 million people. Not enough. We don't even have as much psychologists in the first place, so I can't even count how many we have. So what that means is that there's just not enough care for people, and just not enough for young people in the country. So since we started up in 2016, we have run monthly campaigns focused on different mental health conditions. And sometime in 2017, we found out that apart from raising awareness, you can also cause harm if you're not providing care for people that are actually learning much more about their mental health. So we started up a counseling support center. And in the past 4 years of that center existing, we've reached out to more than 40,000 people and provided about 3 sessions for each person on average, really. So in a way, we were actually much more prepared for COVID when it came, because we have been providing digital text-based support services for about 4 years before COVID hit. And that meant that, it became easier for us to actually scale our work. As challenging as it was, because we had about 70% increase in people reaching out to us in the first 2 months of COVID. And obviously it kept on becoming bigger after that. It was kind of easier for us to actually transition our services without making too many changes. The only thing that we needed to do was to actually train more people to be able to provide support. Now, when we found that we were not able to make up the numbers, we started providing group support therapy for young people that needed it. We set up a different website that actually created and curated resources that were very COVID themed for healthcare workers, young people who actually had to stop schools, and a lot of people that had to stop their work and had a lot of social and economic difficulties. So it was a very tough time actually dealing with COVID in Nigeria. But I think that with the fact that we were already providing that kind of digital support program in the past, it made it easier for us to actually adapt to the challenges. I can say for sure that one of the big challenges that we had was that we had young counselors who were also coping with the difficulties of COVID. So we had people that were breaking down when we were trying to provide support for more people. At some point, we had to reach out to some partners in South Africa and the US to support our counselors. But subsequently, all of that sort of normalized. Now we have a better rhythm in how we provide the support. And we are thinking about how to scale that work across Africa as part of the plans that we have. And lastly, for me, is that last year we also launched the first national level COVID-19 study looking at the impact of COVID-19 on mental health of Nigerians. And we're actually launching that on the 15th of this month. So that's something we're looking forward to sharing the results of, because the results obviously they're very interesting, and they could lead to some huge policy asks and some huge policy actions.
Thank you very much, Victor. Anyone else want to continue the discussion?
Yeah, and maybe Victor, it would be a pleasure if you share that report with us on the 15th, because we would love to read it. And maybe there's indeed another panelist who would love to elaborate on their story a little bit more or react to the story of Victor.
Yes, so maybe I can go and speak. I really liked what Victor mentioned in regards to the support of the young people mental health during COVID-19 pandemic. And that reminded me of a unique experience that I had as I volunteered as the activity called coordinator in Sudanese Childhood Diabetes Organization. So when you are a diabetic and you are a children who live in the COVID-19 era, you face a triple burden. First of all, the burden of diabetes. We have also the burden of the pandemic and the burden of the mental health itself. So in that activity in Sudanese Childhood Diabetes Organization, we were organizing lots of support groups for the different children with respect to their needs and different age groups. So the aim behind the support group was to advocate and educate the diabetic children about mental health disorders and how they can control their diabetes when they are stressed. Also, we organized the capacity building activities which targeted the healthcare students, including nutritionists, pharmaceutical students, and medical students about how to manage diabetic patients who are having stress or specific mental health disorders. And I'm really glad to share that our organization is the leading organization in the management of diabetic children in Sudan. And also we won United Nations Award for the leading organizations, specifically the civil society organizations in management of diabetic children with mental health as well. Another important experience also that I had during the COVID-19 era is coordinating a mental health campaign in Medical Student International.
I think we lost the connection to Fatima, but it was so interesting what you were telling us about the diabetes. And we were just thinking about Leslie because, as we heard, you are a medical student from Peru too. So is there a link between Sudan and Peru and the important insights that you gave us, Fatima? Or is it a whole nother story in Peru, Leslie?
Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, we didn't get that.
Can you hear me now in a good way? Just to rephrase what I said.
Could you maybe please repeat what you said? I think we lost Leslie due to an unstable internet connection. Well, if you hear us, Leslie, please break in and continue where you left off. I don't know if you wanted to continue, Fatima, or someone else wants to take the floor.
I continue. Many youth have to learn to different teleconference platforms that were not very common for use. I consider that I have always worked better when I make physical contact and the same space as people. So in my first task and training session, I was unmotivated because it was not the same to make me seem dynamic with very such as virtuality. Although it is true that call unit many people, it also has a negative impact with which we are to learn to live and adapt. I imagine that many use still of difficult, and digital media such as a radio and television and internet have to be your allies and not generate a greater gap between use, and that is what both organizations and the state must take proponent use them favorizing and critical consumers. And also in EFNCA Peru, we were different campaigns regarding mental health promotion such, and we are together that the work on the world dives with prevention, and we have different speakers for it. Also, people can live anonymous, not with message support. For it, also people can live anonymous for people we're going through in this situation. Thank you.
Yeah, so with regards to COVID, I just wanted to say that hearing Victor, Leslie, and Fatima talk shows me how, even though COVID has affected, different countries differently, it shows me how, similar experiences are in a way, because, for example, when we do sessions with young people, a lot of young people are saying, you know what, my anxiety is high. I felt depressed here and there, or, they were saying how their families felt a certain type of way. And it just shows me how there's so much we can do, still. And for example, that's why, in the introduction, I mentioned how we do those videos for young people, because we know that mental health is a really tough subject to talk about. Some young people don't want to talk about it, because they may feel anxious, nervous, or they may feel a certain type of way to talk about it, and that's why we created a platform where, we create really nice and interactive, mental health videos where we talk about, for example, things they may feel anxious about, vaccinations, for example, we give them services that they can access, because we've noticed that in sessions, young people felt like they felt there wasn't services for them, when in reality there was. And I feel like it's so important to build networks in countries together and, make sure that everyone talks about their mental health, because it is very important. I myself, I'm a psychology student and a criminology student, so I can see how, mental health is such an important thing, and that's why I'm so like happy that I'm having conversations with you guys, and hearing the stories about, not even stories, but just, hearing what, how different people deal with mental health. That's why I'm so excited. I would be so excited to even work with you guys going forward, with my project and the program that I work with. Toby is another young inspector, because as I said, there's so much that we can do around mental health, and, mental health to me is a really close thing. So yeah, that's what I just wanted to say based on, what Victor and Leslie and Fatima said.
Yeah, thank you so much. You said something so interesting. Like, you spoke about how there is actually mental health available, but it doesn't seem like youth can actually access it. Where do you think the problem is between those two? Is the connection between both parties not good enough, or do you think youth needs to more actively reach out to that help, or the other way around?
So I think that, mental health is a very sensitive topic either way. Some young people feel more likely to go and receive that support. Some young people feel like they can't speak about it because of their upbringing or, other stuff, because obviously mental health is a very individual thing, even though the society has similarities, but there's always going to be individual differences. And I feel like sometimes, as I said, young people may not want to access the support because they feel anxious. It's not that, for example, London services aren't, saying, oh, there's this service, there's that service, because the UK is doing a lot, on mental health. However, that's why I mentioned our program, because in our sessions, we want to make sure that young people know it's a safe space to talk about mental health. Because sometimes, I even myself forget, oh, there's a service here, and obviously I don't deal with mental health problems right now, but, if I was to, that we always need to remind young people, even older people as well, that there is something always for everyone out there. Just like our videos that we produce, even though they're targeted for 11 to 17, elder people can view them as well, because mental health is such an individualized thing. And yeah, I just feel like that's why I said building connections is such an important thing, because it literally reaches so many people, and the audience becomes bigger, and it's easier to communicate with people, especially mental health, because it's such a sensitive and personal topic. So yeah.
Thank you, Anna, for mentioning
Thank you very much.
point.
I was going to give the floor lastly to Laura. Do you have any experiences or stories to share?
Yes. Well, last year it was my last year of high school. So it was a very stressful time, because that's when we started homeschooling a few months before having our final exams. And it was a very stressful situation. I even had some panic attacks. And I think in Luxembourg, we are blessed to have access to these digital technologies, but we are also overwhelmed by it, because social media and these digital technologies can overwhelm us with so much information, which keeps us from taking a step back to reflect on it, and while we're reading something, or even question it. And this really result into confusion. We had Black Lives Matter going on. We had a lot of people fighting each other. And I would even go as far as to say that I had an existential crisis, because I was questioning in the world that I was living in. I was like, okay, so are we going to help each other or destroy each other? And do I even want to stay in this world? Because like we have the climate crisis. I did not see people helping each other. And mental health, that was not even a question, because I mean, this pandemic contributed to this feeling of social isolation. Of, yes, we had, I mean, the digital technologies to contact people, but everyone was just so like just confronted with themselves. I mean, we were not able to see people, so we were constantly confronted with ourselves and the world of social media, this somehow parallel and digital world. And also, I think what's very important to say, and what Anna also mentioned about depression, anxiety, and mental health, is that it's sometimes not even affordable. I mean, it's really expensive. When I went looking, I wanted people to help me, but I didn't know how. And even when I went to see my doctor was like, oh, I can suggest you this psychologist, but I don't know which one would fit you, because you have a lot of different psychiatrists or psychologists. And that's also a problem, that even doctors don't know much about this topic. And the thing is, when you start going to see a psychologist and you feel like you don't connect with this person, you think something's wrong with you and you just give up. But it really maybe depends on what you need. And for example, I still had, let's say, the courage and the urge to look for what I needed. And actually what I needed was a mental health coach, which helped me actively work on my mental health. And that's really something like a mental health coach. It's not the same thing as a psychologist. And so I think, first of all, it's not affordable, and we don't know what kind of access we have to. And also, I feel like society does not validate our emotions. They're telling us, oh, but everyone's feeling the same. Other people, that maybe live in Africa have it way harder than you, that you live in Luxembourg, in a country that's rich. Like, you are not allowed to feel this way. And this is something that has really affected me. And yeah, so I think it's very important and to talk about mental health, because after all, no matter where we come from, it's something everybody can rely on somehow and is affected by it. So
thank you so much, Laura. It looks like Fatma, you had something to say. Would you like to jump in?
Yes, actually, I was so taken by what Anna and Laura mentioned, and I immediately remember the situation within my own home country. So when we talked about the accessibility to mental health services, in my country, we still lack having very solid mental health policies, which are adopted by the Federal Ministry of Health. And this is reflected in many aspects. For example, the public health awareness campaigns about mental health are extremely rare in my community, and they are mainly led by civil society organizations instead of the government. Also, on the other hand, this is reflected in the access to mental health services. So you can find that there is the centralization of resources and services in the urban areas, while in the rural areas, there are no mental health services. And this is a very big problem, because mental health awareness issues and stigma are very rooted within my community, from cultural perspective and from religious perspective as well. Because most of the people think that, oh, if you have a mental health disorder, it means that you are having a problem with your religion, for example. This is a very wrong concept, and we really need to fix it as well. I also want to add something. Most of us discussed that we are having anxiety and stress because of the overuse of social media and digital platforms. But on the other hand, I know some colleagues in my university who were having mental health disorders and stress because they cannot access even internet or having devices to their lectures during the lockdown. So this is the intervention from my side.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for the whole panel who shared and dared to give us and to provide us with this insight, even though some of these stories were quite personal. I believe we at least are both very grateful for you sharing it, and we believe the audience at home is too.
It was very interesting what Fatima said, that there's two sides of the coin, really, both having the stress of having access to digital devices and internet, and also not having it.
Yeah.
But we actually have a couple of questions for you.
Yes, we do, because our audience in the meantime was looking and listening, and they sent us a few questions. So I'm going to start. You want to do the first question?
Yeah, absolutely. We have one question for Victor Hugo. And according to you, what are the main barriers to free and accessible online mental health services?
Right. So, I mean, it's a lot of things. In Nigeria, we don't have enough, should I say, digital service provisions. Data is still expensive. Internet costs are still very much high, and internet in itself is not as fast as it should be. If you wanted to have a virtual consultation with a counselor, you're gonna keep having breaks in transmission. So that's like a very very straightforward challenge. The other is policy. In Nigeria, we still have a mental law that dates back to 1957, which is before the Nigerian independence. And that means that the rights of people with mental conditions are not necessarily taken care of. You can move to something digital when you haven't even fixed the analog situation in your country. We still don't have good mental health policies that actually advise on the appropriate ways to provide digital services. So we can have digital adaptation in Nigeria because of we have the logistical reasons of data, but we also have the policy and political will reasons that actually back that. So while on our own paths as an organization, we are trying as much as possible to reach those that we can reach. We know that it's not something that is, should I say, that can reach the whole country. And we're actually trying to sort of like balance that by providing physical services and trying to look at how we can have should I say, mental health clinics across different regions and communities, and having young people and volunteers actually man those. So that's something that we're working on for next year, but for next year and for the next couple of years, because it's going to take a while to set up, because it needs a lot of funding and a lot of resources that we actually don't have. But yeah, that's the kind of reality that we have to face.
Questions coming in. I guess that says all about how interesting this second panel was. And we would love to have all of them answered. So we're going to try to answer as much of them as possible. The second question is for you, Fatima, and it says, can you develop youth participation in public health campaigns?
Okay, first of all, thank you for this important question. And the answer is definitely yes. So speaking on my own experiences, all of the public health campaigns, which were led by civil society organizations and some of the non-governmental organizations, were actually led by youth who were suffering from mental health or who were having the responsibility to their communities. In regards to having very strong collaboration and meaningful youth engagement in the public health online campaigns, the answer is, as Victor said, is about having strong policies and strong advocacy campaigns. So I really believe that at the beginning, the first stage is to increase the awareness among the community members and among youth themselves about the importance of their own participation in the decision-making process and increasing awareness among their own communities. Then we can use these campaigns as a lobbying tool, an advocacy tool, to press on the decision makers in order to change their policies. So we can ensure good integration and collaboration between the different stakeholders, including youth, in the different mental health activities and policies, not only the campaign. I hope that I answered your question.
You really did. Thank you so much, Fatima. And it's, as you said, it's quite hard to keep track of all the good things that you're saying, because we're getting so many questions. And we actually have a question for you, Leslie, as well. You spoke about gender and gender equality, and in your opinion, does the increased use of digital connection in any way, shape, or form increase gender inequality? Leslie, I'm going to repeat the question for you, and I hope that you can hear me. You spoke about gender inequality, and therefore we have a question for you. In your opinion, does the increased use of digital activity have any correlation with gender inequality? It seems like we are not having Leslie with us currently, so we're going to keep on since we have a lot of questions and we would like to get them answered.
Yeah, we can move on to another question and then we'll come back to you, Leslie. If you hear us in the meantime, please tell us. So we also have a very interesting question to Laura. It's quite a big one. So if you... oh, was that Leslie? Oh, no, that was not Leslie. If it's Leslie, please interrupt us. So Laura, this question is for you and it states, if you could give 3 tips to increase awareness of mental health issues among young people, what would they be?
First of all, I think raising awareness on social media helps already a lot. That's also what I did. And I helped a lot of people because they felt like I was speaking out of their heart. They felt like heard. And it's important when you feel like talking about your mental health that you do it on social media if you feel to, because some people, like also Anna mentioned, are way too nervous or they don't know how to express themselves. And when somebody can, it's great. And secondly, talk about school about it. I feel like it's in school we don't talk enough about mental health because it's not treated as something that's important. And I think if teachers would talk with their students about it or have a psychologist come to school and talk about it will help a lot, because I can imagine that some kids are not very comfortable talking about this with their parents, maybe because they have a difficult situation or they want to keep it for themselves. So we really need to look out for more accessible access to it. So I think mentioning it at school would be very important. And honestly, as a third point, I think talk about it with your close ones. Really, it seems very basic, but it's not. I think many people feel a bit uncomfortable talking about their mental health. But I think once I started talking about how frustrated I felt so relieved, because in the beginning I didn't want to talk about it with my friends because I was like, oh no, they're dealing with their problems too and I don't want to bother them. But actually it really helps feeling connected and feeling the same way. It's such a big feeling of relief. And also connecting to other people on social media. I have also talked with a friend of mine that's from Iran and how he's living the situation. And it's really, really important about staying connected and not feeling left alone, because dealing with mental health should not be a fight against yourself.
Oh, that's such a beautiful quote. Thank you, Laura, for being able to so easily give 3 tips to the people who ask these questions. And we totally agree. We think that speaking about it with your loved ones and in education systems more, that might help us to remove the stigma that is surrounding the whole topic of mental health issues. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And just to have like the taboo subject of mental health, and we're trying to spread awareness now with this event, so thank you so much, all of you. We actually have one last question that we were going to try to do, and it's for you, Anna. You spoke about your project and you spoke about the work that you have done in London, and we were just wondering, did you get the support that you expected, and how did it work when you reached out to your Ministry of Education?
Yeah, so it was very interesting in the beginning. So before kind of COVID hit kind of schools, and when lockdown on schools happened, myself and Toby is another young inspector, we was thinking, what is the best way to reach out to young people, in the borough, as well as, reaching out on a more national level, because we knew that young people felt, anxious, they felt a variety of different feelings, and then we was like, okay, the best way to go about it is through reaching out to young people through social media. To make sure it's interactive. And then when we fed it back to the council, because the council public health team and the clinical commissioning group, so the NHS. When we fed back to them, we want to create, interactive videos with really cool graphics, about mental health, about vaccinations, about exam stress. They were like, whoa, let's do it. That's cool. It's something we never done before, and it was such a surreal process, because now I think we're on like 12 videos so far, and we started in December or January. Yeah, January, December. And then right now, our latest video, even though it's not super to do with mental health, it's to do with lateral flow device testing. And we have our COVID champions in there. They're talking about if they do their test, if they don't do their test. And it's like, yeah, to just answer the question in a nutshell, we received a lot of support, and even the schools are really like happy about the program. Right now, I think we've got around 65 young people engaged from schools, which is, wow, like, yeah, it's pretty good. So obviously we're happy about that. But myself and Toby and the team as well want to reach out as many as young people as we can. Obviously we know that, COVID is a sensitive topic itself. Some young people feel like, they don't know if COVID is, like a thing. Some young people feel like, COVID is such a big thing. It affects mental health. It affects a variety of things, education as well. So yeah, hopefully going forward, we're going to create more interactive videos, which we upload on YouTube on our Merton Council website. And in the future, we're also hoping to work with young people to create mental health resources. That is our next big, go-to, because we obviously feel like mental health is such an important thing and is a sensitive topic, as I said before. And it's not even just mental health, exams, schooling is such an important thing which impacts mental health, as Laura said as well, kindly. So yeah, and even though, as I said before, we focus on 11 to 17, we are actually planning to expand into groups who are vulnerable, for example, those with disabilities, because obviously we do not want to forget, about groups who are SEND, and yeah. So hopefully our project is going to spiral out, everyone's going to be involved. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, we think it did. We think you did answer the question. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Victor wanted to ask a question or elaborate on what we just said.
I was just going to add to some of the things, some of the great tips that Laura already shared, in terms of how to raise awareness. And I think the first thing I usually tell people is to learn, to study themselves about what they want to share, because obviously if you don't have any information, you wouldn't be able to give anything. And the second thing, of course, is to identify your own story. It's important when you're engaging with young people and with anyone actually to just have a story to tell, because that's an entry point for you that actually makes conversations easier. And the last thing for me is actually to do it in a safe way, because most times we don't talk about safety, especially when you're sharing things online. You have to know what to share. You have to be comfortable with the things that you share. You have to make sure you share with the right population, because I mean, social media is a very, very crazy place and it can get really difficult sometimes when you share some personal things. So make sure you do things in a very safe way.
Thank you so much, Hugo. I'm going to repeat that. Thank you so much, Hugo, for sharing that. That's exactly what we wanted. We wanted this dialogue of all of you sharing your advice and also sharing your experiences and stories. I thought that we were perhaps going to try one more time with Leslie. You never got to answer your question. So Leslie, can you hear us?
Yes.
Perfect. Then I'll try to ask you your question again. In your opinion, does the increased use of digital advice in any kind of way, shape, or form increase the gender inequality? Sorry.
Mm-hmm. In Peru, gender violence increased and teenage pregnancy because in quarantine, many women have to live with aggressors. In Peru, was enabled a telephone line to deal with the emergence of violences and shelter for victims in the same way was enabling to people we are going through mental health problems with emergence and violence and the shelters on victims. No? I will also like to mention that in Peru, We have a mental health law that supports free access and free discrimination to mental health service. Within the strategy, we create community mental health centers in which anyone with insurance can book, receive care. However, and I can attend so point for help. The care provided is not adequate and often these mistakes use disease from being unable to take treatment or continue with it. Uh, Private concessions are very expensive and we have a stigma of being able to assume that we need help for our limbs. We have of the large numbers of uncreated mental health illness that I beyond in the extent involved in place. So such direct better training and awareness of start provide timely help and break and stigma with spaces for dialogue like this.
And thank you everyone in the panel. It was very, very insightful to have you share your stories as well as answering our questions.
And I think sadly, we have arrived at the end of our side events. We have officially heard and spoken to so many people across the whole world, and it actually delighted our heart. We had such an active audience, so thank you for the questions. We will keep all of this in mind when we try to change the United Nations Youth Resolution this year that still doesn't have the connectivity between digitalization and youth mental health issues.
Yeah, thank you, Manal. And I have also brought with me a lot of insights from our panelists today, so thank you. I would like to give a big thanks to our audience for being so active, and I would also like to give a big thanks to all of the youth delegates that made this event possible. For those of you who didn't get your answers, we will get back to you through email, so everyone will have their answers by today. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for being a speaker, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.